Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be counting down all of the palettes that Colourpop released in 2020, and I'll be sharing some swatches and of course my favorites, so don't forget to stay tuned to the end of the video to see which ones I liked the best. So let's go ahead and jump back in time to January of 2020 with the first palette Colourpop had released for the year, and that was the Mint to Be palette. This was a 9-pan monochromatic palette with those fresh minty green shades, and I didn't get this one because I'm not a big fan of monochromatic palettes. I like a little bit more variety to choose from, but I have to admit, as a lover of green eyeshadows, these shades are really pretty. And then the following week, on January 16th, they had launched Nude Mood and Blush Crush together, and I was really excited when these came out. Nude Mood has warm tone neutrals, but they aren't too dark or too reddish or orange, so I thought that these shades were very easy to work with on my lighter skin tone, and it has a nice variety of shades in it as well. And then Blush Crush was definitely my favorite of the two. It has gorgeous blush nudes with pinks and peaches, and it was just such a pretty color story going into the spring. I really love how soft and feminine it is. And then on January 30th, they launched All That, and I think this was more of their Valentine's Day themed collection. Now, I'm not normally a fan of reddish eyeshadows, so I likely would have passed on this one, but Colourpop did send it to me in PR, and as it turns out, I really did love some of the lighter shades in this palette, and I felt like I could just use those deeper red shades as accents, like in my outer corner, and I was able to make some really pretty looks with it. Also at the end of January, they released You Are a Cutie, and this one was an Ulta exclusive, and I ended up actually buying this one because I really loved the cooler tone pinks and purples in the palette, and up until this point, Colourpop hadn't released much in the way of cool tones except for the Fame palette. So with this one, I thought the formula was okay, but my favorite shade in the palette, Kiss Me, which is a bluish lavender duochrome, was kind of difficult to pick up from the pan. It had like a stiffer texture, which was a little bit disappointing. Other than that, though, I thought it was super pretty. Unfortunately, this one has already been discontinued. So then the first few weeks of February were pretty quiet, but on the 20th, they released the Sailor Moon palette, and this one had a super pretty pastel color story with cooler tone pinks and purples again, and a pop of yellow and gold, and I actually missed out on the first launch because it sold out so fast and I forgot to set an alarm, but then Colourpop sent it to me in PR anyway, so I was very excited to get this one. So after this palette launch, it was almost a month before we saw anything else, and that was the Making Mauves palette on March 12th, and I got so excited when this palette launched because it had all of those beautiful cool tones, and even though there were only one or two actual mauve shades in this palette, I loved the dusty lavenders and the dusty pinks, and I just felt like they complemented my cooler tone complexion so beautifully. So this was definitely one of my favorites throughout the year. Then on March 19th, we got the Mulan palette, and this is one that I never ended up getting, mainly because it just didn't call to me. I felt like I have so many warm tone palettes already and warm tone neutrals, and something about this reminded me a little bit of Tati's Textured Neutrals palette, which I really don't reach for very often, so I kind of felt like I didn't need this one. So pretty much right about at this time, everything had shut down. We had all the lockdowns, but we got a surprise on April 17th because they had released the All Things Equinox and Solstice palettes at Ulta. And Colourpop had said that even though their factories were shut down, they had shipped these out to Ulta before the pandemic. So this particular launch wasn't affected. And Colourpop did end up sending these to me in PR, but I would have purchased them anyway because these were so pretty. The All Things Equinox palette was a gorgeous, cool-toned purple color story, and Solstice had a beautiful variety of spring-like shades with the pinks and greens mixed with warm neutrals. So these were both beautiful palettes. Then on June 12th, almost 2 months later, which is pretty much an eternity in Colourpop world, we got the tie-dye collection. And even though it had been a while since the last launch, I didn't really jump to buy these, mainly because the color stories didn't appeal to me quite as much. One of them had warm tones, which I already have plenty of, and then one had the pinks and purples, but it kind of made me think of the You Are a Cutie palette that had launched back in February, and then the green one looked kind of like the Mint to Be palette from January, so I didn't really feel like these were unique enough to warrant a purchase. Then at the end of July, on the 23rd, we got the Wild Nothing collection, and this one wasn't super unique either, but when it comes to neutrals, I tend to lose my willpower, especially if there are those pretty green shades in there, like there were in this palette. I just loved these soft, pretty colors, and it also had a bit of variety, so I felt like I could get quite a few looks out of it. I also love that this one had no pressed glitters in it as well, so I did end up purchasing this one, and I really, really love it. And then a few weeks later, we got the Garden Variety palette on August 6th, and this one looked more like a spring release than something that was coming out in late summer, but I suspect it was one of those delayed collections, and it was such a pretty color story with the bright, shimmery pops of purple and green and peach, along with some earthy matte shades, and Colourpop sent this one to me in PR, but honestly, I would have purchased it anyway because the color story is so lovely. The following week, on August 13th, we got the Colourpop Land palette, and I really wasn't interested in this one, mainly because it has a pastel color story, and I usually have not so great experiences with those because they can be kind of hard to formulate, not to mention that the tones kind of looked somewhat similar to Garden Variety, which I already had. And then on August 20th, we got the Lil Ray of Sunshine palette, and I actually did a double take when I saw this one because it reminded me a lot of Naked Honey with those yellowy browns, and I thought it could be a potential dupe until I looked closer and realized it was an all matte palette. I do love shimmer shades, so that's the main reason I didn't jump on this one, but I do like how this had a little bit more color variety than their previous yellow palette, which was Aha Honey. Next up, we had Coast to Coral on September 11th, and this one had such a beautiful color story, but it looked a lot like previous palettes that I had, like Sweet Talk and Baby Got Peach and Soul, just to name a few. So while I was initially attracted to the color story, I decided that I already had some similar palettes in my collection. And then on September 24th, they released the Sandstone palette, and this was one of my favorite color stories they had come out with so far this year. I loved the earthy tone neutrals and that southwestern vibe with the pops of gold and bronze and terracotta and rusty orange. It had so much variety just to create so many different types of looks, and I didn't buy this one during the initial launch, but the more I saw photos of it, the more I liked it, and I ended up getting it during a sale a little bit later on. Next, on October 1st, we got the Hocus Pocus palette, and I was so excited for this one because Hocus Pocus is one of my favorite Halloween movies. Sadly, I missed out on the launch. I really need to start setting alarms for these things, so it sold out rather quickly, and by the time it had come back in stock, my excitement had died down a little bit, and I realized at the end of the day, I just didn't really need it. It had similar shades to the Garden Variety palette, the other Disney palettes, So Jaded, even Good Sport, so I just kind of felt like I had a lot of these shades already. Then the following week, on October 8th, we got the That's Taupe collection, and this was more cool tones, and even if Colourpop hadn't sent this in PR, I definitely would have purchased it because I love a cool tone neutral palette. I was really happy to see more taupey shades in this one since their previous cool tone palettes earlier in the year were more pink and purple and mauve shades, so I really, really ended up loving this one. Then on October 22nd, we got Stone Cold Fox, and I purchased this one myself because it was kind of like a bigger version of That's Taupe, and it had a similar color story to one of my favorite palettes this year, the Natasha Denona Glam palette, and I just loved that this had such a huge variety of cool tones to choose from the taupes and grays to the dusty pinks and silver and cool browns. It's really just a cool tone lover's dream palette, and one of my favorites from this year as well. Next up, on October 29th, they released the Child palette, and this is another one that I didn't buy initially, but after seeing swatches and hearing rave reviews, I decided to buy it, and I am so glad I did. These greens are super pretty, and I love that it includes some neutrals to balance out the looks and add a little bit of variety. Next, on October 30th, we got sort of a holiday-themed collection at Ulta with 3 different palettes, Baroque, Grandeur, and Ornate. And I had done some comparison photos of these on Instagram and thought they really looked like other Colourpop releases, so at the end of the day, I decided not to buy them. But as it turns out, Colourpop did send me the Grandeur palette in PR, and while it is a pretty color story, it's not necessarily something I would have chosen for myself, mainly because it looks and feels very dark overall. And I'm not a huge fan of those deeper, smokier looks for every day. Next up, on November 12th, we had the Raw Beauty Kristi collab at Forest Sight, and I thought that this palette looked beautiful, but again, I didn't make it a priority to set an alarm for the launch or for the restock, so I was never able to get my hands on it. Now that enough time has passed and the excitement's died down, I'm pretty sure I have these colors in my collection anyway, and I'm just feeling like I don't really need it at this point. Then on November 19th, we got the Boudoir Noir and the Ménage à Moi, and I got sucked into buying these palettes during the Black Friday sales. I'm sure I have these colors a million times over, but after seeing various swatches, I just couldn't resist. The Ménage à Moi has a beautiful blush and mauve toned look that I really prefer over the brighter pinks or reds because they're a little bit more muted, and it reminded me kind of a more glamorous version of Making Mauves. And I also loved the golden olivey vibe of the Boudoir Noir. It looks kind of like a fancier sandstone palette with all of the golds and bronze and the browns and the greens, so it was just super, super pretty. Then on November 22nd, we had the On Cloud Blue and Cloud Spun palettes, and these really didn't appeal to me that much because I don't really wear blues or pinks unless they're more on the muted side, and these looked pretty bright overall. They definitely look pretty in a swatch, but I knew I would probably never wear these on my eyes. Next up, on November 23rd, we got the Big Poppy palette. This one's another all matte palette, so I knew I wasn't going to be getting it for that reason, and also because to me, it kind of looked a bit like Tartelette Toasted or the Naked Heat palette, which I have but rarely ever wear, so I ended up skipping this one as well. Then a couple days later on November 25th, we got the Fade into Hue palette. This one has a really pretty rainbow theme and lots of room for creativity, but it's really not my cup of tea, which is why I didn't buy it, but I think it would be an amazingly versatile palette for anybody who loves color. Then on December 4th, we got the Hello Kitty palette, and this is a launch I probably would have skipped except Colourpop sent it to me in PR, so that's why I have it. It reminded me a little bit of the Sailor Moon color story, and to be honest, there was something off when it came to the formula of this one. To me, for some reason, it seemed extra powdery and not quite as pigmented. I'm not quite sure why, but it could just be that these lighter shades are a little more difficult to formulate. And then the last palette of 2020 was on December 17th, and that's the Wine and Only palette. I skipped this one because of the deeper, smokier color story, and that combined with the red shades means I'm likely to not reach for this one very often. Alright guys, so those are all of the Colourpop palettes that were released in 2020, and if you'd like to know my favorites, I would have to go with probably Stone Cold Fox being number one, also the Child palette, That's Taupe, and Sandstone. I also really liked the Wild Nothing palette, Nude Mood, and Blush Crush, so those are probably like my top six, but definitely with Stone Cold Fox sitting at number one. So anyway guys, I would love to hear your thoughts and your favorite Colourpop palettes of this year, and if there were some that disappointed you, I'd like to know that as well. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me as always today. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, and also if you're not subscribed, definitely go ahead and hit that subscribe button before you go. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in my next one. Take care. Bye.